Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I've got a very loud Canadian voice, so holler if you can't hear me. I'm Eva.
I'm Tom.
And we work at a place called FutureGov. If you're not familiar, it's an organization that works to shape public services that are built for the digital age. So we work a lot with local authorities and do a bit of work in the engagement world, which is what we're here to talk to you about, specifically around something called the Camden Neighborhood Assembly on Health and Wellbeing. So last year, at the beginning of 2018, we were brought in by Camden Council to work on essentially a hyper-local approach to engagement around health and well-being. So we were brought in by the Health and Wellbeing Board, which sounds quite fancy, and they had the deputy leader, as well as a couple of folks from sort of like senior level folks from health and social organizations in the council, so a bit of a mix, which was great. And they said, go do a hyper-local deliberative democracy thing. And we said, okay. And so essentially, over the course of a year, we gathered together 12 to 15 people from 4 areas within Camden to come up with ideas and interventions around health and well-being. So it had some tenets that are similar to citizens' assemblies, but was quite different in a number of ways, and we'll get into sort of like what worked for us and what didn't. But on the whole, we felt really good about the process, and we really enjoyed doing it. There were 12 workshops over the course of the year, as well as online engagement and a lot of co-design throughout the whole process that Tom will talk a bit more about. But what really differed from a traditional assembly approach was what came out at the end of the day. So if you've worked in the citizen assembly space, usually there's like a report that comes out with recommendations, and they're really useful and really fantastic. With this approach, it was something, the council really wanted something that wasn't just for the council to act on, but was also for organizations within the area, so in the health and social space, as well as residents to take on, so a shared ownership. And so what they created, oh no, too excited. Okay, were these ideas, 3 ideas around health and well-being, as well as roadmaps to actually figure out how to make these ideas a reality and how to test them a bit further. I can tell you more about this, but I think it might be more useful if Tom takes you through sort of like what worked and what didn't with this approach.
Cool. So we worked on this for a year and have like loads and loads of reflections of what we think kind of worked well and what didn't, and we have a full report which outlines all of that in quite an engaging way, which we'll share at the end. So I guess some of the high-level sort of takeaways. The first one was around the ideas being sort of shared ownership and delivery, so not just residents making recommendations to the council of what they need to do, but all of the ideas and interventions that came out of the process were shared. So community actors and organisations had to do some things, residents had to do some things, and the council had to do a number of sort of structural things around that. So they were kind of a joint endeavour. And all 3 of the ideas have been taken forward in different forms by the residents involved or by the council, and the participation team in the council is kind of supporting that process. The second one was around flexible membership. So as a kind of opposed to a kind of more traditional assembly, we kind of left the edges quite organic, so people could come and go as they wanted. We wanted it to be, I guess it was running for a long period of time. We wanted people to feel like they could drop in and out and not feel like they had to commit to the whole sort of sessions and multiple sort of weeks. And we felt this kind of worked quite well. We set this out as a kind of key process, sort of key principle to start with. So different sort of groups kind of came in and without, and it kind of felt like kind of a continuous conversation between lots of different people rather than a set group of sort of people from the start. The third one was that we were kind of agile in our approach and approach the actual process as well. So we continuously reflected with the assembly what we felt was working and what wasn't. If the process was going to be a bit too slow, we didn't focus on something else. We'd change the session the week afterwards in the next phase to make sure it kind of took us into account. So it's kind of the whole thing was kind of generative throughout as well. And the fourth kind of reflection was that we tried to make things as visual as possible, and we're a sort of design organisation as well, design-based organisation, and we tried to lean on our design skills quite a lot, and we felt this really invited participation, made people feel like they could contribute and sort of have a say on the issues, and it also kind of drew people into the assembly and the action. So we also shared a lot of these online alongside the assembly, and the residents kind of had their sort of say and inputted, and also joined the assembly after seeing some of the visual outputs. Some things we thought like we might do a bit differently next time. So the assembly was focused on health and well-being, so quite broad, and I think the council wanted to do that, so it felt like residents could completely set the agenda of what they wanted to focus on and what the local priorities were. I think, and in principle that was great, but I think in reality it had quite a knock-on effects, so it made it quite hard to coordinate lots of different stakeholders who work across lots of different areas of health and well-being. I think it made it hard to actually make sure there was kind of relevant lived experience in the room as well, and sometimes conversations didn't feel so quite genuine as they probably could have been. And there's also a practical case of trying to assemble lots of different data from lots of different organisations on different areas of health and wellbeing, which takes ages and is hard to process for people in the room. The second point was around finding the right pace. And we want to try and keep sessions as short as possible and the number of workshops as short as possible so that as many people could participate as possible. But at the same time, giving sort of everyone in the room enough time to actually deliberate and discuss things. And the whole point, we didn't feel we ever kind of got that balance quite right. And sometimes we felt quite rushed. But also we were aware we didn't want to make it sort of a big commitment for anyone else involved. And third learning was around making the assembly sort of truly representative. So ensuring that it was, so we had a kind of broad criteria of people, again, different ages, different areas of Camden, different ethnic minorities. And I guess this fluctuated throughout the assembly. And I guess we didn't start with a rigorous sorting process because that wasn't what we were kind of aiming for. But I think in the future we'd probably create different sort of ways and different models of engagement. People who don't want to sort of engage through a traditional assembly model, we might sort of do sort of different, engage in different places and make sure all those kind of conversations come together.
Now we have some hot takes to share. So these are just some things that kind of came to mind and that we wanted to put to all of you, people who care about local democracy and ways that we do it. We think that, well, I come from a background in doing citizens' assemblies and public engagement, and I've done it for years and years, and 5 years ago, very few people were talking about assemblies in this way. And now, like, you log on to The Guardian and they're talking about David Attenborough going to talk to the climate assembly, and like, that's a big shift, and like, citizens' assemblies have become part of our narrative as a community, as a society, especially in the UK. And so it's a really interesting time, and it's a really interesting moment, but there's not a lot of necessarily shared agreement on like what to do about that and how we sort of like use that moment to try different things. And I think I'm not a purist about it. I think it's really exciting to try out new ways of working. Being more co-design led was, as someone who's done a lot more traditional assemblies, I was like, ooh, this is going to be interesting. But it worked really, really well. And I think it resulted in something really robust and amazing. But I think trying different things and trying different approaches to engagement and deliberative engagement is really exciting. And so I think we should all do it. And you all already are, so I'm telling you things that you know. But then something that we also found out was using a model that fits the task at hand and is appropriate for the communities that you work with. So a big theme that came out of the assembly was around social isolation. And so we really wanted the voice of socially isolated people in the room. And so as a result, we had that flexible structure of membership and people coming in and out, which was great. It worked really well for people, but like that's not a traditional approach. And so getting a bit flexible and recognizing sort of where the limitations were on engaging certain groups. And then the last one was finding a champion who can build long-term relationships and push the outputs and ideas through. So we were working with someone within the council who had never really done public engagement before, so it was like a very new experience for him, and he was very skeptical. But he then had a complete 180 and really became this huge champion of both the process and the approach. He bonded with assembly members and really bought into everything that we were sort of doing and felt a lot of shared ownership of making sure that the ideas actually went somewhere because he'd been part of this whole process. And so, I mean, this is something, and this has been through all of my engagement processes and experience, is finding someone within the organization to really push the ideas forward once you're done, or the report or whatever it is that you're producing, to make sure that it doesn't sit on a shelf and that doesn't collect dust. And that because we were talking about it in a workshop earlier around like doing something with the feedback that you receive, and making people realize that you're hearing them and recognizing them. And so having a champion like that makes that a lot easier. Anyways, those are our hot takes, and we just want to say thanks. But if you want to see the report, it's on the internet, and we can share the link. But thanks for having us, and we're around if you have questions.